Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for another episode of BookMarked. My name is Jessica. I'm a librarian at the Chelmsford Public Library, and this is my colleague Deanna. She's also a librarian at the Chelmsford Library, and we both are Readers Advisory Librarians, so we love to bring you and talk to you about great new books, and today we have a great selection for fall. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that we're going to be voting for One Book 2022 next week. We're allowing you to have a say in what we're going to read. Voting will take place in the library and online and through Facebook, so definitely visit our website, sign up for our newsletter, find us on Facebook for all of the details, and that should start October 4th. We've got a great selection for you.
4 great books to choose from.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are. They're all good. And we'll also be having a new fall reading challenge, and that'll be later in October. So definitely check back on our website for more details on that too. And so, how are you doing, Deanna?
All right, ready for some fall reading? I dressed the part today with my fall colors. So my first book is a book called The House of Ashes by Stuart Neville. I've never read Stuart Neville before. He tends to write like hard-boiled crime novels, and it's not really my thing, but I always feel like he's been a gap in my mystery reading. So this one is a standalone. It's about 2 women. It's set in Ireland, so I was like, all right, I'm gonna give him a try. So these 2 women, the first is Sarah. Sarah and her husband Damien have moved into the Ashes, which is a house that actually has been literally built on the ashes of a recent fire. On their first night there, they're awakened in the middle of the night by a knock on the door, and it is an old woman named Mary, and she claims that it's her house and that she's supposed to be living there. So Damien takes her back to the care home, but Sarah becomes kind of curious about Mary and about the house, and so she goes to visit Mary in the care home, and that meeting kind of turns into a catalyst for both women, because for Mary, she did indeed live in that house, but it wasn't a happy time. She and her mother and some other women were actually held prisoner there by the 3 men who owned the house. For Sarah, as she learns Mary's story, kind of comes to realize that she also is in an abusive relationship, and her husband has brought her to this house to kind of further isolate her from everything that she's familiar with. So, these 2 women, it's a hard story. It's a kind of a dark tale. It's a ghost story. It's a mystery. And I can't really compare it to Stuart Neville's other works, but I would say that he's done a really good job in kind of capturing these 2 women and kind of their anger, their denial, and ultimately kind of their hope for going forward for both of them. So I think if you've read him before, definitely still read him and read this book. If you haven't, and if you like authors like Benjamin Black, if you like Fiona Barry, then this might be a good way to give Stuart Neville a try.
Oh, that sounds really good, despite the difficult material.
It is. It's got some difficult parts in it. It's a little dark. It's a little violent, but also it shows these women being resilient as well, which I think is he really captured on the page.
Wow, cool. So I have a book from the other end of the spectrum now. It's a little bit silly. It's also, though, kind of a ghost story, but a little bit on the silly side.
Might need it after you read this book.
Yeah, there you go. So we set it up like that. So the first, the book that I have brought with me to talk about is Several People Are Typing by Casulke. It's a debut novel by the author, but he's written numerous articles for the New Yorker, the Atlantic, all those major publications. He mostly cultural criticism. This book was such a surprise. I wasn't sure when I read the review of it, when I was doing the ordering and I picked it up. I wasn't sure how it was going to go because it's kind of gimmicky. The entire novel unfolds through conversations on Slack. So Slack is the work chat platform that no doubt over the last year, and if you didn't know about it before, no doubt over the last year and a half, it's become an essential tool. Like either Slack or one version of it has become an essential tool for work communication while we all had to WFH, work from home. So if you aren't familiar with Slack, though, you shouldn't be deterred by that premise or that setup because he does a really good job of establishing the parameters of the tool and how he's going to tell this story really early on with some like light Slack jokes, and you kind of get it. So anyway, the book starts with Gerald, who's a dry-humored young employee at a New York public relations firm, and his consciousness has been subsumed into Slack. And so the first chapter is just 1 page long, and it's like help, and then the Slack bot, which is the help feature in Slack, says, how can I help you? How can I help you? And of course it can't help him get out of Slack. So. Meanwhile, his body has been left in sort of like a sleeping state in his apartment, and he knows this because his closest office mate, Pradeep, has gone over to his apartment and confirmed for Gerald, who can communicate with his office mates, that his body is still there. And so Pradeep then takes Gerald's body and moves him back to Pradeep's apartment and then starts to take care of him until he can figure out how to get Gerald out of Slack. Meanwhile, meanwhile, there's all these snowstorms, train delays, children's illnesses that require all of the other employees to, at various times, work from home, WFH. And so all these other employees, Gerald is trying to communicate with them and tell them what's happening to him. Pradeep is the only one who believes him. The rest of them think it's like, at best, it's a joke, or at worst, he's abusing his work from home privileges. So anyway, it's great. And there's enough, because of all of these delays and everyone's working from home, there's enough for them to create, him to create these side mysteries. And including how did Doug the boss's standing desk get broken while he was WFH? And who is this Lydia person who keeps coming into their conversations? And what on earth does the dusty stick emoticon mean? Which is a Slack-only emoticon that I learned about for the first time in this novel. So anyway, it's a gimmick, but it's also a taut exploration of office culture. But it does contain some very human moments too. So it's a good break.
That actually sounds really funny. It reminds me, it's almost like it's like The Office, but for kind of modern work from home times, that we can all relate to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so my next book is a book called The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And I confess that I chose this book for very superficial reasons, because it has an awesome title, and because the cover is beautiful with a black cat on it, and also actually because I got a really raving review from Stephen King, who happens to be one of my favorite authors. So it's told in a variety of voices, the story. There's Ted. He's a young man kind of living in his childhood home. And you know pretty quickly that there is something off about Ted. You're not quite sure what it is, but that kind of unfolds over the course of the story. Then there is his daughter, Lauren, who has these strange episodes. They're kind of unexplained, and her comings and goings to the house are very mysterious. And then there's Ted's cat, the black cat of the cover, Olivia, who we also hear from, and she takes care of her Ted. Oh. So, but the story kind of started 11 years previously when a little girl named Lulu had disappeared. She disappeared while she was on vacation with her family at a lake near Ted's house, because she wandered off to follow her big sister Dee, and she was never seen again. So now Dee is actually moved in next door to Ted because she's never forgotten her sister, and she thinks that Ted has the answers to what happened to her sister. So she is the final voice in the book. And the cover calls it a horror, but I wouldn't say that it's horror. I think because of the creepy house that Ted lives in, maybe you could kind of say gothic, but mostly psychological suspense, because really the main story, the main suspense comes from trying to figure out, what's going on with Ted, like what's wrong with him. It comes from, Dee's guilt about her sister's disappearance, and it comes from learning about the roles that Lauren and Olivia play in Ted's life. So even though I read it for superficial reasons, I was really glad that I did in the end. And I think if you like Stephen King, if you like those kind of, gothic-y suspense kind of stories, then I think that this is a really good fall title. The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward.
Sometimes you don't make so much of a mistake by judging a book by its cover, right? I mean,
exactly.
Sometimes it just works out.
I know. I always tell people to not do it, and yet that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, they know what they're doing in publishing.
Yeah.
My next book is a big powerhouse novel coming out in the fall. It's called Bewilderment, and it's the latest by the multiple prize-winning author Richard Powers. And this one just absolutely floored me. Although I did also read a review I forget what publication it was, but suggesting that I might just be overly sentimental. But the relationship of the father and the son's whole personality and being were just so absorbing and heartbreaking. The last book that Powers came out with was called The Overstory, and this one's very different from a lot of his other previous novels. They've been very big and heavy and serious. And Overstory, of course, was a big eco novel that talked about the relationship of trees, between trees and trees to humans, and how trees tell the story of time. And then The Echo Maker, of course, was a chilling story of a man who comes out of a coma and distances himself very much from his family and tries to solve the mystery of his accident. Anyway, in Bewilderment, an astrobiologist, our main character is an astrobiologist, and he creates models of possible Earths so that when we find those Earths, we'll know what we're looking at. We'll know that we've finally found life. And, it's very much very much a proponent, scientist involved in the proof that other life must exist, Anyway, he is struggling after the tragic death of his lawyer and environmental lawyer and activist wife in a car accident, and in the aftermath of her accident, he's struggling to raise his son, who struggles emotionally, like he has an emotional disconnect. He flies into wild rages, and he's so much so that he's having problems at school, and the administration at school is trying to pressure him to find a doctor and medicate the child so that he can continue to attend school. However, but the child is also a genius, like he's brilliant, But the father does not want to do this to the child. He does not want to go down that path. So he finds an alternate treatment that's being developed by another scientist at his college that, instead of using medication, sort of tries to replace his emotions with different imagery so that he finds a way to control his emotions better. So anyway, it starts to work really well. But at the same time, though, his passions and his focus increase to an intense level. One of the most beautiful parts of the book, though, is the way that the father uses his exploration of possible planets to calm his son. So it's one of the things they do together is they build different planets. And it's heartbreaking, it's incredibly relevant, and it's a really beautiful story. So definitely.
Oh, I think that I just saw this morning that Oprah has picked that book for her next book club title.
Yeah, I'm ahead.
So you are already set for that. Yeah, that sounds really good, actually. I've put that on my hold list. So my next book is also kind of a long-awaited title by Amor Towles. It's The Lincoln Highway, it's called. And you remember Amor Towles wrote A Gentleman in Moscow, which was really popular, still a very popular book club title. This one is very different. It's set in 1954 here in the U.S., and it is a story of Emmett and Billy Watson. Emmett has just returned from a place called Salina, which was a boys' detention home, and he had spent time there because of his role in an accidental death. But his time there is done, and he's come home, but his father has passed away, and their family farm is getting repossessed. So Emmett and Billy decide, well, this is time for us to make a fresh start, and they decide they're going to head to California to create a new life for themselves, and also to try and find their mother, who abandoned them 8 years earlier. And the only clues that they have for their mother are 9 postcards that she sent them from along the Lincoln Highway. And in case you don't know, I didn't know, the Lincoln Highway was actually the very first highway that was built that went cross-country. It went from New York City to San Francisco.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so they decide they're going to head out to California. But before they leave, 2 friends of Emmett's from Salina show up, Duchess and Woolley. Duchess is like this fast-talking con artist, and Woolley is kind of the wayward son of a wealthy New York family. And Duchess wants to go to New York because Woolley has an inheritance coming from his grandfather. And he's like, hey, we'll all go and we'll split it. And Emmett's like, no, we're heading west. But Duchess makes it otherwise. And suddenly, whether they liked it or not, they are all heading to New York City. In this book, it takes place over about 10 days, the action in the book, but it's really it's like a rich, leisurely kind of read. He's created these really unforgettable characters, Billy especially, but also Emmett and Duchess and Woolley. And it's a book about brotherhood, it's about friendship, and about finding your place in the world. And I think that, if you liked A Gentleman in Moscow, even though this is a very different book, you will definitely like it. And I believe that this one will also end up in the book club rotation. It's a really fabulous read, so get it on your hold list.
That's great. So it's kind of like a road trip novel.
It is a road trip novel in a way, inadvertently.
It's important that the characters are good, because you don't want to be stuck in a car with someone you don't like, right?
Right.
So, anyway.
And it's also about the people they meet along the way.
Yeah.
They meet a lot of interesting people along the way as well. So,
oh, that sounds great. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a good book.
My next book is another heavy-hitting release for the fall. It's called, it's the latest by Anthony Doerr. So Anthony Doerr was, of course, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of All the Light We Cannot See, which was from a few years ago. This one's called Cuckoo Land, and it's very different, but still very rich and expansive. So it's beautiful, epic that spans centuries. It's in the past and then extends to the future. I think it's 2141, so not so much in the future. Maybe in the early chapters of the book, we're introduced to the fictional work by Antonius Diogenes, and he's a Greek tragedian. Cloud Cuckoo Land actually comes from Aristophanes' The Birds. So that's a real thing, but then the author, Antonius Diogenes, is a real person. But the text of what we're reading, this old Greek story, is fictional. Yeah. So he's actually made that up, and you get to read the text of it as you go. So it's very imaginative. So it starts in 15th century Constantinople, and the text is uncovered in an abandoned monastery just outside the walls of the city by a young girl and a young boy, who then smuggle the text out in the shadow of the Ottoman siege on the Ottoman Empire's siege on the city. And then we jump forward to the 1950s, and we meet Zeno. And Zeno is a Korean war vet who has had a troubled childhood, and we learn about that in some of the chapters too. But then at this point, at a certain point, he develops an interest in ancient Greek, and specifically starts to translate this text by Antonius Diogenes called Cloud Cuckoo Land. Then we jump further into it's around 2020, the 21st century, and Zeno is leading. He's now an octogenarian, and he's leading a group of fifth graders to perform a play of Antonius Diogenes's comedy. But at the same time, on a lower level of the library, a young teenage eco-terrorist is trying to plant a bomb in the library because it shares a wall with a real estate agency that he's trying to destroy. And so so those two characters cross over. And then it jumps even further into the future to 2141, I believe, where Constance is a young woman who has come across this story, which has been told to her by her father over the years. And she's alone in a spaceship, which is going to Beta Oaf 2, which is in the wake of Earth's environmental collapse. So they're trying to send generations of people off to space to find another Earth. So it's just, it reminded me a lot of David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas for the way that the passage of time is told through, and you get echoes of the passage of time told through the characters, and they don't necessarily know that they're connected by this literary tradition, and it really celebrates literature and storytelling and how that connects us over time, and I think that's really important. So it's great. It's a much more pleasurable read though than David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. That was a little bit of a difficult book to get through, but I just thought it was really beautiful. And the different stories of the characters are kind of intertwined. So you don't learn one and then the other. They kind of weave in and out of each other. Okay. So you can gather, you understand the connections over the course of their over the course of their stories being told, and slowly revealed the grand connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because I'm always impressed with authors who can kind of weave multiple stories together so that by the end you're like, oh, I get it. That's amazing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's what that sounds like. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, another one to add to my list. So my next book is straight up thriller. It's called No One Will Miss Her by Rosenfield. And it's the story of two women. So Lizzie Willette, she kind of lives in a poor town. She comes from the poor side of town, married to the wrong sort of man. She grew up with her father. He owned the local junkyard. So she's always been somebody the town, kind of torments or shuns and ultimately ignores. And so now, she's in her 20s and she's trying to make her way in the world. So she starts renting out their lakeside cabin to vacationers from away, they call it. And then the other woman is Adrienne Richards, who is rich. And she spends her time shopping and posting on Instagram and trying to forget that her husband almost went to jail for like this Bernie Madoff kind of scam. And she rents Lizzie's cabin, and despite being very, very different, these two women kind of bond, over drinking wine and sharing secrets. So the book opens, and the first thing you read is, if you're reading this, then I am already dead. So Lizzie has been murdered, and her husband is the main suspect. He has disappeared. And so the story goes kind of back and forth with this commentary from Lizzie from beyond the grave, between the investigation at the town and the lakeside cabin, and Adrienne who's gone back home to the city. And so, you kind of know that Adrienne and her husband have something to do with Lizzie's murder. And I literally cannot tell you anything else because I will give it away. And this book has got lots of twists and turns, and I don't want to ruin the fun for anybody. So if you like twists and turns, if you like unreliable narrators, Gillian Flynn, Paula Hawkins, those kind of books, then get this one on your list. No One Will Miss Her by Rosenfield.
Yeah, put it on hold now. I want to know what those twists and turns are. I have another heavy hitter for you, Jonathan Franzen. Multiple prize-winning author of The Corrections from 2001, one of my favorite novels. Freedom from 2002 and Purity from 2015. He doesn't publish a lot, but when he does, it's like the biggest thing. It's an event. Yeah, it's the biggest thing to happen. His books are often just like they're sweeping stories, and they're saturated in the story of America, of us. And they're told through like little microcosms of families and dysfunctional families very often. The novel Crossroads, for all the brutality relayed, could possibly be his most poignant and human story of all, and definitely harkens back to The Corrections more specifically than the other intervening novels, at least in my opinion. Crossroads of the title is refers to a youth church group but also could be seen as like we're meeting all these characters in this family at a crossroads in their life when they're starting to make certain revelations that are going to lead them to tragedy maybe, but also to like kind of a reconciliation. Russ Hildebrandt is we're set in 1971. So Russ Hildebrandt is the patriarch, and he's also a middle-aged pastor at the First Reformed Church in their town. And he's lost his foothold with the youth of the congregation, who have turned their attentions to the cool and charismatic, like very deep new pastor, Rick. So the two of them have kind of a big, it's not kind of a rivalry, it is a rivalry. And so Russ is really challenged by that. He's also, he's also really challenged, he also really does not like his wife anymore. Like he thinks she's frumpy, she's embarrassing, like he doesn't like taking her anywhere, and he's really going after this like sexy new widow who's moved into town and had joined the church. And so at the same time, Marion, who is probably the most richly detailed, richly developed character of everybody, Marion is Russ's wife, has like certain tragedies and passions in her youth that Russ doesn't know everything about. So those are revealed through her character as well. And then Russ and Marion's children, Clem, Becky, Perry, and Judson, are each likewise undergoing their own personal battles and struggling mightily to overcome. And it's hard to do this novel justice in the time allotted for this show. It's a big novel. It's also the first in a trilogy. So it's going to take the Hildebrandts, this family, over generations all the way up until 2020. So you know they're going to hit like some major events in recent history all the way up till then. So I can't wait for the next one, and it's magnificently resonant, and I just loved it a lot. So
yeah, that's great. So that's something to look forward to too. Sometimes, you know, like it's not just this one book; it's going to be three. That's fantastic.
It's really interesting that he chose to do that, but I think that he just couldn't, you know, fit it all into one.
Yeah.
Obviously, this one's already like 500 pages. So.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. So you're talking about like, you know, the big book of the season. I have my last book is like a little gem of a novel called Small Pleasures. It is set in 1957 England. A middle-aged woman named Jean, who is a reporter at the local newspaper. She lives with her elderly mother, kind of spends her life being a dutiful daughter. And the newspaper runs an article about parthenogenesis, which is, you know, fertilization, you know, I should say birth without fertilization, right, which amphibians do. But they get a letter from a woman named Gretchen Tilbury who says that her daughter was born without involvement with a man, like a virgin birth. And so Jean, as the only woman on staff, is sent to explore this. And she kind of gets involved with Gretchen and her family. She actually believes Gretchen, and you know, some of the facts are checking out. And so, you know, over the course of the story, like these two women are really going to kind of become intertwined. She becomes friends with her. She becomes kind of a surrogate aunt to the daughter, and she falls in love with Gretchen's husband. So, you know, they're definitely going to come to a crossroads. And I would say for a small book, the ending really packed a punch, at least for me. And so I would say, you know, in between your big books, you definitely check out this little book called Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers.
Oh, that's great. We're really building a good mix here, you know?
Exactly.
So I just have about a minute and a half, but I did want to bring Louise Erdrich's new book. I know, another heavy hitter. I got lucky this time, called The Sentence. And she, of course, her most recent was A Night Watchman. I think a lot of our readers have probably read The Roundhouse. She's wonderful. The Sentence tells the main character is a native woman named Tookie. In 2005, Tookie is 30-ish, but she's also kind of like screwing up. And she ends up being framed by two people she thought were her friends, unknowingly transporting a body across state lines that also was being used to hide illegal substances. So she goes to jail, but she's heartbreakingly sent to jail by one of her closest, oldest friends from childhood. So anyway, when she's in jail, it's full of so much humor. I can't say enough about the humor. It's great. While she's in jail, she just reads voraciously. When she comes out, all she wants to do is be a bookseller. So lo and behold, she gets a job at Louise Erdrich's Birchbark Books in Minneapolis. Which specializes in Native literature. So Louise appears every so often, in funny situations, but not as a main character. Tookie mostly just associates with the other booksellers. We also have, in Minneapolis, we have the pandemic, and we also have George Floyd's murder. So, yeah.
Interesting. Oh, modern times.
We missed that. I got cut off. I'll have to bring it next time.